failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning and welcome to The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner, who is in Boston, in Lincolnshire, the Brexit capital of England, because any moment the latest net migration figures will arrive, a big moment for the government with a huge, unprecedented rise expected. The previous net migration figure stands at a pretty shocking 504,000. Remember when David Cameron, remember him? When he was Prime Minister, he said he would get migration down to the low tens of thousands. Well, we're going to be looking at how this number has got better or worse, and we're pretty sure it's going to be a lot worse. We're out and about around the country. As I said, Bev Turner, my co-presenter here, she is in Boston, in Lincolnshire, often called the Brexit capital of England. It's where 75% of people voted for Brexit in that referendum in 2016. It's also got a very high, large migrant population. I think something like 29% are regarded as people from overseas. Also, GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White, he's in Dover, which of course has been in the eye of the storm with the small boats crossing the channel. And our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, is in Westminster. Let's start with you, Mark. Mark, as you've been on air this morning, the boats have been crossing the channel.
Yes, they have. I mean, this is a very visible manifestation, of course, of what critics claim is Rishi Sunak's inability to control the borders. But it is, in terms of overall net migration, a small proportion of those who came here in 2022. We know that last year, for instance, it was just under 46,000. This morning, again, the weather, it's not too great in the Channel, actually. It's quite windy, not ideal conditions for people coming across, but about 150 have arrived so far this morning. We're just getting the net migration figure as 660,000. 606,000 actually. Now that seems to me to be a lot lower than what's being briefed out and been reported in recent months. But perhaps that's kind of news management at its best. Talk about figures north of 700,000, almost as much as 1 million, and then when the actual figure comes out of 606,000 as the net migration figure, still a record, the highest ever net migration figure. Everybody breathes a sigh of relief and thinks, oh, well, that's not too bad. But it's 606,000 people, the size of a small city, that arrived in the UK last year. Now, what will be interesting as we delve into these figures is to find out how this breaks down. We know, for instance, that probably the biggest portion of that net migration figure will be foreign student visas. Now, there were some figures that reported 470,000 student visas that were issued last year. So we'll just get the actual accurate figure from the Office for National Statistics, because if that figure is true, then it seems odd that with 170,000 people arriving from Ukraine last year because of the war in that country, and then of course those who've come across on the points-based work visa system, that it would only be 606,000. So we'll get the breakdown of those figures. On that points-based system, a lot of controversy about that as well, Andrew, because the government decided to lower the criteria to try to fill the gaps in the health and social care sector. In the health service, they were crying out for workers, so that points-based system threshold was lowered so that the salaries were lower, but also the skills required were lower, specifically in the health and care category, and it will be interesting to see actually how many of those came in. We're getting some more figures now. 361,000 student visas, so 100,000 short of those figures that we were seeing, provisional figures that were being reported a few weeks back. So 300, and just say that again for me, Tom. 361,000 student visas. Now that is a significant number. There's some indications that about 140,000 dependents came across as well. So knowing, of course, that this is going to be the highest proportion of arrivals in the net migration terms, the government has preempted that with the announcement that they're going to make it much harder for a lot of these foreign students who are coming here to be able to take dependents across as well. That will go some way to making a difference. But when you're talking about 361,000 people coming to the university sector from overseas in the course of a year, that is an enormous figure. Can be explained, I suppose, in part because of COVID. During the COVID year and a half, almost 2 years, there were very few foreign students who were coming across here because of all the restrictions. So then there was a significant surge once those restrictions were lifted. Let's see, of course, in the year ahead what those figures are. But that is an enormous figure, Andrew.
All right, that's Mark White, our Home and Security Editor in Dover. Let's get political reaction here from Darren McCaffrey, who is our political editor in Westminster. Now, Darren, have we been taken for mugs here? Because I'd read apocalyptic figures as high as 900,000. The legal migration figure could be 606,000, as Mark White says, is at the much lower end of the scale.
Yeah, indeed, and it may well be the case, Andrew, that there is a bit of media management here. Right in saying that over the last couple of weeks it had certainly come to the newspapers' attentions that figures were being bandied around at around 750,000, potentially up to 1 million. Clearly the official figure today is substantially lower. However, as Mark has just pointed out, it is still a record-breaking figure and still, frankly, a political headache for the government. It's interesting how this debate, in many ways, is framed, though. I noticed that you said the figures could be much, much worse on the assumption that, you know, large-scale migration is bad for the UK. And it's interesting when you look at those student numbers, the university sector would say it's completely the opposite. The very fact that we've got hundreds of thousands of foreign students coming to the UK is actually really good for Britain. because it supports their sector. It supports the fact that we've got world-leading universities in this country. It means that even though a lot of students get themselves into a hell of a lot of debt, domestically, the fees could well be even higher if it wasn't for those foreign students who clearly pay much higher fees than they do. And there is a whole big argument, and you hear it within government, and there was a big argument when Theresa May, Andrew, was Home Secretary, saying that actually student figures should not really be included in net migration, because students, yes, they come here and live here for a couple of years. Some of them might stay and get jobs, but on the whole, most of them actually leave. They're not really going to become permanent residents of the United Kingdom. But yes, this is a government that since 2010 has said that they want to see net migration down to tens of thousands. David Cameron said it, Theresa May said it, Boris Johnson got rid of it, but essentially alluded to the fact he wanted net migration lower, and Rishi Sunak has done the same, and yet they have frankly failed on that policy quite spectacularly. If anything, things seem to be going in the wrong direction, if you like, from the government's point of view. And this is at a time in which people thought post-Brexit migration would just naturally fall, and it hasn't happened. And that is largely also down to government policies. Let's be clear about that. It is the government that have allowed work visas to be set actually quite low in terms of the medium wage that you need to be able to get in. Even today with these record figures, the government is suggesting they're going to waive visa for things like fishermen to be allowed to come in, for fruit pickers and others, particularly in the agricultural sector. So this is something the government can control, and today, given the fact where they want to be, they have somewhat failed to do so. And we're going to have an urgent question here in Parliament in about an hour's time. Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister, will almost certainly respond. Be interesting to see what he has to say.
And just briefly, Darren, there's been a fallout, we know, between the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, and the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, because Gillian Keegan wants ever more students to come in, plus their dependents, because she wants more money in the university sector. 135,000 dependents of students came in last year. Now, the government is moving to stop that immediately, but will that be contested by some in the cabinet?
You're saying 135?
I think it may well be, but I think also the government potentially might well go further, because those dependents, I think, only apply at the moment to those doing PhDs and maybe masters. They don't apply to undergraduates. Many people would suggest, why do students from overseas, if you're going to university, need to bring dependents with you in the first place? And the government have hinted at, frankly, that they are prepared potentially to go further on that. Is that going to create a row within cabinet? You bet it is, because, as you say, those in the education sector do not want to see student numbers fall. But also, let's be frank about this. One of the reasons that the government has been able to claim that the UK economy has actually done reasonably well competitively compared to the other G7 countries over the last 5 years or so, it is not on a per capita basis. It's because our population is growing. It's growing faster than most Western European countries. So our overall GDP, while you and I and everyone else on an individual level might not feel much better off, the country is better off because it's bigger. And there are people in the Treasury who don't mind that. They don't mind the fact that the country is bigger, because it means that the economy is bigger too. And that's why you see these tensions, if you like, between the Treasury, the Education Department, and places like the Home Office, where Suella Braverman is very determined to try and drive down these numbers.
All right, that's Darren McCaffrey, in Westminster. Now we're going to go. Usually sitting next to me here in the studio is the very fine, admirable Bev Turner. She is in Boston, in Lincolnshire, often called the Brexit capital of England. That's where I think a staggering 75% of people voted yes in the referendum, and they've got big issues with migration there and with cohesion. And Bev joins me now from Boston. Bev, morning. You've heard those figures. 606,000, that is legal migration. That's before we talk about the people crossing on the boats. It was at the lower end of expectations, but I think they've got us on that, haven't they? They've been massaging expectations like politicians do.
Now, of course, 7 years ago, this town was celebrating. They believed that Brexit was going to help ease some of the problems that they felt they were experiencing because of so much immigration, particularly from Eastern Europe. I'm stood here in the shadow of the beautiful St Botolph's Church here in Boston. But in front of it is a little courtyard area, which is known locally as Foreigner Island, because there are so many migrants who basically just sit there. There is a rumour that they're using the Wi-Fi from some of the local businesses, but you can see daytime drinkers here. There are groups of men, quite menacing actually, yesterday evening when we were here. I'm joined by a local, Sharina from Bycrofts of Boston Butcher. Thank you so much, Sharina, because I know you've got a very busy day and we've held you up here. How will the locals take these figures of 600,000?
I don't think they'll be surprised because you don't see many locals about anymore. They don't feel safe coming out. They don't want to walk the streets. I don't think they'll be surprised.
And you're Boston born and bred. So what period of time have you noticed this significant change?
The last 3 years, terrible. All the shops shut in and our shop's shut in. But just lately it's getting worse and worse. There's more people drinking, gangs, like you say, on the streets, and nobody wants to walk them.
My understanding is that some of the gang problems are Bulgarian gangs versus Polish gangs versus Lithuanian gangs. Is that what you're seeing as well? It's not so much the local British kids and teenagers that are getting involved in that sort of crime.
No, it's them fight the selves against the selves, and then they use weapons. Well, you know, if you read Boston, there's a stabbing or there's a shooting, and it's scary. Our youngsters try and stay out of the way, I think, just to not get involved.
It's a beautiful town. Some of the architecture is amazing. You were about to say it was a beautiful town.
It was a lot more booming and better than this. I mean, a market day on a Wednesday used to be absolutely amazing. People would travel everywhere. We'd get day visitors coming into the butchers, but now you get hardly anything because what's there to come for? You see Boston on the news and it's not good, is it?
No. And so just to explain to people at home, like why this area is so attractive to migrants, it's largely because of the farming opportunities, the agriculture. But I think a third of the vegetables that we consume in this country are grown actually in this area. Arguably, those farms, those agricultural industries need low-paid workers to come and do that work.
Yeah, but we used to do all that. We used to do it like work on the land, work in the pack houses. You used to when I left school, you earned good money, piecework, but that's all gone now. They work longer hours than us, and they just don't want it. They say we don't want work, but we actually do. But there's not enough work for us to get because they have it.
I was hearing an interesting anecdote about the schools locally, because you've got the old-fashioned grammar school system here, haven't you? You can sit your 11 plus and go to the state single-sex schools even. So normally those schools have fantastic educational attainment in Buckinghamshire and Berkshire, where we have that same system. But here, the children are graded down with, the universities can accept lower grades from them because they're what they call contextualised grades, because they see them as in the context of this community, the education standards have fallen. Is that, do you think, because so many students don't have English as a first language?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of different students. Teachers have got a lot to do, aren't there? A lot of different languages to learn. So I suppose it's hard. And I know a lot of the schools are struggling around here, short-staffed and that, because my friend's son, he's at one of the schools, and I know they're struggling to get everything done for the kids.
So for the town that voted for Brexit, 75% of people here voted for Brexit. Just remind us why at the time that was such a popular vote.
Because they thought they was going to send them home, didn't they? But obviously they haven't, and more's come, and people's lost the faith in it all, haven't they? What's the point?
So there'll be another election next year. How do you think people will vote in this town?
I don't think they will. I think obviously they'll vote to be out, but I don't think you'll get much off many of them. I think they've lost faith in it all. So it's been took over, hasn't it?
So you just feel like it's just kind of a political lethargy, like nobody really cares anymore.
Who cares? What do they care? They don't have to live in it. They just send you lot to do a report and this is how it is. It doesn't make no difference to us. We live in it day in, day out, don't we?
What's a bit baffling to me, I was looking at some of the immigrants this morning who had just sort of arrived at the coffee shop, sitting outside having a cigarette in the morning, and I was talking to somebody as to why they're able to stay. Am I right in thinking that there are employment agencies around here, and if you arrive on a holiday visa, say from Bulgaria, you can arrive for 2 weeks. You go straight to the employment agency and get a local job, and then your rights change?
I don't know. I know there's a lot of employment agencies. I don't know about the rights changing because obviously I've got a job and I don't go looking for jobs, but I know there is a lot you see with suitcases going to these places and then having work boots in their hands and probably starting a job. So, yeah, I should say it's true.
Yeah. Well, Sharina, thank you so much for talking to us. I'll let you go back to the butchers. It's really interesting, Andrew, and you speak to the locals. There is a sense of, as you saw there from Sharina, of like disillusionment, of apathy, of a sense in which they've just surrendered to this significant social and cultural change, because I think a lot of the problems here, it is cultural. I was talking to people in the pub last night who were at pains to point out, they kept saying, we're not racist, but the pace of change in this town has been so rapid that we look out of our front doors and the high street is largely unrecognisable from how it was when I was growing up. And that's what they're struggling with largely here, is this significant, rapid influx of people from different countries. And the language, that keeps coming up time and time again in the conversations that I'm having. Not only are there individuals who are arriving here who don't speak English, but a lot of them cannot read and write in their own language, particularly some of the Bulgarians, the Romanians who arrive here can't write or read in their own language. So that is causing all sorts of problems. But it's an interesting town. It's obviously going through a period of great change, and I'll be bringing you as much of it as I can throughout the morning.
And Bev, hearing that, it makes me think those politicians who think it's fine to have 600,000 people coming here legally, that's almost the size of a city of Sheffield every year, perhaps they should live in places like Boston to see how they'd like it.
I think that's what this really kind of draws to our attention. It must be very different when you have a beautiful Georgian townhouse somewhere near Westminster, and perhaps your interactions with immigrants are that they clean your house. You know, it's a harsh reality for the people here that they're finding a complete lack of integration, social integration, identity integration, cohesion. As you say, as Sharina, we were talking about the education situation. You might have children in the school where the increasing numbers of the children, English is not their first language, and that causes problems. Translators are having to be brought into the schools. There's one big local hospital, in fact, one of the biggest employers in the area here, particularly those who have there are some beautiful big properties in this area. Yes, property is much cheaper than it is in other parts of the country. But for those families who are here and professionals and working incredibly hard, a lot of them are employed in the local hospitals, doctors, surgeons, etc. But one of the individuals I was talking to last night was saying that their children are in the schools here, but their educational attainment is slipping back, because they're having to be taught in classes where English is not always easily understood by increasing numbers of children. So it is a complicated situation, and I don't think necessarily that the politicians who live in the Westminster bubble have a clue.
I think you're absolutely right. That's Bev Turner. We're going to be with Bev a lot in Boston. We've got a big GB News presence there today. Joining me in the studio is Liam Halligan. Liam, we know these politicians who think it's OK to inflict 600,000 people on us legally. That's the legal migration figure. They haven't got a clue what it's like.
Indeed, on top of this legal migration figure, the gross figure, before you subtract people who left the country, often retiring in Spain and so on, a completely different demographic, the gross figure is 1.2 million.
Amazing.
Absolutely huge, which is roughly the size of Birmingham, our second city. There's been a real shift towards non-EU migration. Inward migration out of that 1.2 million from the non-EU is 925,000. From the EU, it's down sharply 151,000, even though, of course, Bev there in Boston is talking about legacy, if you like, immigration over many years from the EU, Bulgaria, Romania, Poland and so on, since that accession of the so-called A8 countries and then others in 2003 and then 2013 under Blair and then under the Tories. Humanitarian immigration has gone up from 9% to 19%.
This is Ukraine and Hong Kong.
And indeed Hong Kong. I don't think many people in the UK would question a lot of that. And I think the way the UK has embraced that phenomenon. You know, by the way, I had 4 Ukrainians living in my house for a year. Many of my friends in my market town in Middle England did as well. But I think there is a disconnect. And I think, how would it be, how would the British media, the broadcast media, be covering these immigration numbers if we didn't have a rather more vociferous now set of broadcasters, not least GB News? I do think, you know, I'm from immigrant stock, as you know, and you are as well. We're paddies from way back, right? And we're allowed to say that. And over the years, immigration into the UK has been met with an enormous amount of tolerance. But I do feel an affinity, I do feel understanding, even though I'm very much sort of professional middle-class person these days, with working-class people who have seen their wages compressed, who feel, you know, they're often from mixed communities themselves, and yet it's the pace of change. For them, high immigration isn't about race, it's about economics and financial security, particularly when they are heavily reliant, as so many of the media and political classes not, on state-financed resources, health, education, maybe council housing, and so on. And so I do feel that this is a bit of a watershed for the UK. I don't think we're a racist nation at all.
Certainly
we have
not.
Huge amounts of tolerance for immigration. Successive international studies have shown that again and again and again. But the political class needs to understand, for a lot of ordinary people out there, these numbers hurt.
They do. We need to talk at length about the energy price cap, so we're going to keep you after the break. But just give us, David, what have they announced today on that, Liam?
It is a bit complicated. We will need a little bit of time to talk about it after the break. But basically, the energy price cap that regulates household energy bills is falling. It's falling. The announcement was today. It will be implemented on July the 1st. For reasons I'll explain, even though headline bills will come down, people won't really feel that, even though wholesale prices of gas, which powers a lot of our electricity, sets electricity prices, however the electricity is generated, even though wholesale gas prices have come down sharply, largely because as that lower energy price cap is coming in, the government is withdrawing support to roughly the same amount. So don't expect massively cheaper energy bills anytime soon, unfortunately.
But the upside is the government will be spending less, so borrowing less.
Hopefully, yeah. On the other hand, the government didn't spend as much as it thought it would on that energy price guarantee because wholesale prices fell faster than we thought. It's really complicated. It's going to need a bit of explanation. But the headline is that even though the energy price cap is coming down, you may see a 5-10% reduction in your bills this summer, but nothing massive, because as the price cap is falling, the guarantee is falling, government support for energy bills, which for many of us amounts to around 400 quid a month in monthly instalments, was withdrawn in March.
Absolutely. Liam Halligan, he's going to stay with us. Now, still to come, we're going to be speaking to you, the public, on what you think about these latest migration figures. Just to remind you, they've come out, legal migration to Britain in the last 12 months, 604,000. This is from a government that said back in 2015 and they were going to cut it down to the low tens of thousands. Didn't get that right, did they? This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. And the weather's set fair for the next several days. Actually, the outlook, even through the bank holiday weekend, is for most of us to stay dry and fine thanks to this. A big area of high pressure that's just been ambling in from the west and will control our weather, as I say, for many days to come. High pressure means the air is sinking, so generally bringing a lot of dry weather. Doesn't mean completely blue skies. Quite a grey start over much of central and eastern England this morning. Some misty, murky conditions in a few spots, but that is clearing away. The cloud will tend to break up. There is the small chance of a shower or two over northern England, southern Scotland this afternoon, but I'd say the vast majority staying dry and fine. A sunnier day for southwest Scotland and Northern Ireland compared to yesterday. Still a bit breezy in the Northern Isles, 10 or 11 here, but elsewhere mid to high teens, low 20s in the south. Perhaps just a degree or so down on yesterday's temperatures, but still in that sunshine with light winds, feeling fairly pleasant. Temperatures will drop away again overnight tonight, so again it will be a bit of a chilly one first thing tomorrow morning, with temperatures down into single figures. Some patchy rain by then trickling into the northwest of Scotland, and maybe not even far off freezing through some sheltered glens across Scotland. So again, tomorrow morning, like this morning, a bit fresh first thing, but quite a bit of sunshine. Again, parts of northeast England, southeast Scotland may stay predominantly cloudy, and a cloudier day over the northwest of Scotland with some drizzle here and there, mostly over the hills and mountains. But again, the vast majority dry and bright, good spells of sunshine, mostly light winds, temperatures mid to high teens, low 20s. So perhaps around about the average for the time of year. But again, feeling cooler in the Northern Isles with some thicker cloud. The outlook, as I said, even into the weekend, dry and fine, plenty of sunny spells around. There are signs that it will just start to turn a little cooler from the north by Sunday and fresher by Monday.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 25th of May. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. So the figures are out. They've hit a new all-time record high, 606,000 for 2022. Labour says the government's lost control. They're not the only ones saying that. They have lost control. There's going to be an emergency statement in the Commons, and Bev Turner is live in Lincolnshire in the Brexit capital of England. Also, a big drop in energy prices as that cap comes down, but costs are still well above where they were before war in Ukraine. And Ron DeSantis, for so long the front runner to be the Republican candidate, he's announced he's running on Twitter, but with a few technical glitches. Does he have any chance of beating Donald Trump for the Republican nomination?
That's right, and this is Bev in Boston this morning, bringing you all the latest as the community here reacts to these new immigration figures. But first of all, here is the news with Rhiannon Jones.
Good morning. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Net migration to the UK has reached a record level of 606,000 people last year. Data released by the Office for National Statistics shows around 1.2 million long-term migrants entered the country in 2022, with 557,000 leaving. That's despite repeated Conservative government's pledges to bring overall numbers down. Stephen Kinnock is the Shadow Immigration Minister. He told us government policies to blame for the rise in numbers.
Numbers are too high. They need to come down. The reason they've lost control is because they've failed to do enough to invest in skills and talent and career development here in the UK. So employers are being forced to reach for overseas migrant labour because they don't have the pipeline of people that are ready to come and work and attracted as well to the opportunities that are here in the UK.
Rishi Sunak has welcomed the reduction in the energy price cap, saying it's a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem has announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Currently, the government's price guarantee limits a typical bill to around £2,500. Ofgem says the reduction reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. It's the first price drop in 18 months due to the global gas crisis. Security guards at Heathrow Airport are beginning a 3-day strike over pay on what's expected to be one of the busiest days of the year for air travel. Heathrow says it may take longer than usual to get through security, but claims it has contingency plans in place to minimise disruption. Members of the Unite Union have already held 15 days of industrial action, including over the Easter holidays. A teenage TikToker has apologised after being handed a criminal behaviour order for a social media prank. Bakari Bronzagaro appeared at Thames Magistrates Court yesterday after he recorded himself entering someone's home without permission. The 18-year-old had pleaded guilty to failing to comply with a community protection notice. He later apologised, saying he was having fun but did feel bad. He's been fined £365. Patients will be given more choice and greater control over their own care with a new NHS app as part of government plans to tackle waiting lists. After speaking with their GP, they'll be offered information on up to 5 healthcare providers, then choose where they'd like to go for treatment. Research shows a patient's waiting time can be cut by up to 3 months by selecting a different hospital in the same region. A ship which ran aground near the southern end of Egypt's Suez Canal has been refloated. The vessel, named Shin Hai Tong 23, had been stranded for several hours due to an engine malfunction. It took at least 3 tugboats to free the 190-metre-long bulk carrier. 2 years ago, one of the busiest waterways in the world was impassable for almost a week after a giant container ship became stuck. The presidential campaign of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was hit by technical glitches after a Twitter malfunction.
All right, sorry about that. We've got so many people here that I think we are kind of melting the servers, which is a good sign.
The 44-year-old entered the 2024 race for the White House during a live event with Elon Musk on the social media platform, but it was soon overshadowed when the live stream failed to launch, causing a 20-minute delay. DeSantis joins a host of Republicans, including former President Donald Trump. And tributes continue to pour in for one of rock and roll's most famous stars. Tina Turner has died at the age of 83.
You're simply the best.
In a career spanning over 60 years, the American singer sold more than 180 million albums and won 12 Grammys. Mick Jagger's called her inspiring, warm, funny and generous. Tom Jones describing her as one of a kind. The actress who plays Tina at the Tina Turner musical in London says the superstar would bring a huge party to heaven. The audience at the West End musical has been reacting to the news.
Well, we were just overwhelmed. I think everybody was just so emotional. We didn't know how to react, really, did we?
What an amazing story of resilience, of female empowerment.
I brought probably the best bouquet of flowers you can buy because she simply was the best.
What's love got to do? It's got to do with who needs a heart when the heart can be broken.
And she will, of course, be greatly missed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Andrew and Beth.
Well, in the last 30 minutes, we finally got those net migration figures. They show it reached an all-time record level in the last 12 months of 606,000. The gross figure, of course, the net figure was 1.2 million. But when you take out people who left the country, maybe to retire in Spain, it's 606,000 now. That is at the lower level of expectation, but it's still far, far too many. Let's speak now to Henry Hill, who's the deputy editor of Conservative Home, and also we're going to talk to Steve Valdez-Simmons, who is the asylum rights director at Amnesty International. Henry, if I could talk to you first to get the political reaction to this. The Prime Minister pledged to get back control of our borders, to keep immigration low. 606,000 is the size of a small city.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about the points-based migration system, which the government brought in after Brexit, is it actually allows you to see in quite granular detail what the government's immigration policy actually is. And below that kind of tough talk about bringing down overall numbers, this government has consistently made it easier and easier to bring in workers from overseas, added more jobs to the shortage occupation list, which means that companies can recruit overseas at only 80% of the going rate. They've mostly scrapped the requirement to advertise jobs in the UK before hiring overseas. So it is far too high. And if the government ever wants to get serious about bringing down net legal migration, to set aside for a moment the problem with the Channel and everything else, it needs to talk honestly about why the economy is currently so dependent on imported labour and how it can change that. Until it starts having that very difficult conversation, nothing's going to change.
How difficult politically will this be for the Conservatives? Because there's going to be an emergency question today. Yvette Cooper is the Shadow Home Secretary. She'll mock the Tories and say if they can't control legal migration, how are they ever going to get to grips with illegal migration?
Well, previously this would have been something that was less of a danger for the Tories just because it would have been difficult for Labour to outflank them on it. But Keir Starmer really does seem to be going for the government on this. Labour have just announced that they will scrap the current rule that allows a worker brought in on a shortage worker visa to be paid only 80% of the going rate, which Labour argues encourages companies to underpay rather than paying British workers properly. So this is a point of vulnerability. And if Labour follow that up with other coherent policies aimed at reducing our long-term demand on imported labour, that's going to put the Conservatives in a very difficult spot because they need to have those policies themselves if the voters are going to take these promises seriously. But in the short term, the Department of Education, the Treasury, the Department of Business, they all want to just keep hitting that short-term fix of more and more immigration.
All right, that's Henry Hill from Conservative Home. I'm sure we're going to get a completely different perspective on this now from Steve Valdez-Simmons, no stranger to this programme. He is the Asylum Rights Director at Amnesty International. Steve, morning to you. How do you react to these figures? 606,000 is an all-time record figure.
Well, I do think that we could have a more honest debate about these things if we would get these figures in some sort of perspective. I think you highlighted that these were at the lower end of expectations. Actually, they are significantly below the expectations that have been published in newspapers over the last few days. The reality is that this country, politicians, others, have been making a lot of noise about numbers of immigration for decades, quite frankly, and all the time doing significant harm to the people who are most affected in all of this, the people who do come to work, to study, also to seek asylum, other reasons, rather than fixing anything to do with our country and how we treat each other, including new arrivals. If we focused on that, we could have a better functioning immigration system and perhaps calm down any excitement about numbers of people.
The population of Sheffield is 640,000. Are we going to carry on having a population of Sheffield coming into this country every year? Because we know they're not building enough houses for people living here already. There's not hospitals that are under huge pressure. Same with schools.
Well, let's remember that many of the people who come to this country are those who make those hospitals that we have work, that make some of those schools work. So it's not simply about the question of numbers. In fact, the whole debate that was touched on earlier about the issue of wages, for example, why is that a focus on cutting down numbers of people? Why not just simply focus on the idea of paying everybody properly? If that resulted in there being a need for fewer people to be given work visas, fine. But why not treat that as a matter of ensuring that everybody is paid what they should be for the work they do?
All right, that's Steve Valdez-Simmons from Amnesty International. Still in the studio with me is Liam Halligan, our business and economics editor. Just very briefly on a side, because I want to get back into the energy cap. Steve Valdez-Simmons said there have been much higher figures predicted in the newspapers and in broadcast media. We know how it works, Liam, because we work...
Because the government was telling journalists what they thought their expectations were.
And it's called expectation management, isn't it? In the way they did that in the local elections, we got that rather wrong. Because actually, the local election results
they said they were going to lose 1,000, and they did lose 800, and they lost 1,050.
Let's go back into the energy cap. Why this is significant, and why, even though energy prices are falling wholesale, and why the government is reducing the cap to what is it being reduced from 2,074 to 1,206? Why it's not going to mean people watching and listening to GB News are necessarily going to see a much cheaper energy bill.
Well, strap yourself in. I apologise, but there are lots of numbers floating around here. It is complicated, and I'll do my very best to explain it and what it means for Britain's 32 million households, Andrew. I've put some numbers up on a graphic. What's happened today is that Ofgem, the energy regulator, has announced that from the 1st of July, the energy price cap will be, which regulates the average household combined gas and electricity bill, has been cut from 3,280 to 2,074, as I said, from July. And so that means average bills will come down from 2,500 where they currently are, because aside from the cap, there's also an energy price guarantee, which is 2,500, to £2,074 a year. And that is a significant reduction, Andrew. It's a reduction of £426 a year.
Very good.
Which is 17%, so almost a fifth.
Yeah.
You know, whoopee-doo. On the other hand, Andrew, in March, the government removed the across-the-board energy subsidy to all households of £400 a year. And so, actually, with that subsidy removed, even though the price cap's come down by just over £400
we're going to be no better off.
I don't think we'll be particularly better off. Now, it may be, as energy markets normalise a little bit, the energy companies start giving deals, giving offers to give people bills maybe below the price cap for a bit, betting that the price cap will come down further as markets normalise further. So it may be that prices come down a little bit more, maybe by 10%. But because the government's withdrawing the subsidy, just as the energy price cap is being cut, and because most journalists will focus on the fact that the energy price cap is being cut rather than understanding that the subsidy is also being withdrawn. And how many people are going to get the time to explain it on live television like I'm now explaining it to you? People will feel bills are coming down more than they actually are.
And just explain finally, Liam, why prices are falling anyway on the wholesale market. Why is energy not as expensive?
Because
is the effect of the war?
So after... Look, energy prices were rising steeply in the back end of 2021 because there was already argy-bargy between Russian gas traders and Western Europe. Western Europe relies on Russia, or did, for 40% of its gas. Of course, when Putin invaded Ukraine on the 22nd of February last year, gas prices went to the moon. They spiked, 15 times the normal amount. And they were elevated last summer and last autumn. Since then, though, they've plunged. Wholesale gas prices, Andrew, are now below where they were before the war in Ukraine. They're higher than the long-term average, but they've plunged. The danger is that we have a colder winter this year. Last winter was actually rather warm, so we didn't need as much gas as we thought we would. Otherwise, bills would have been even higher. And the danger, of course, on top of that, and it's difficult to say this, but we have to if we're being responsible, is that the geopolitical situation worsens more and the EU weans itself completely off Russian gas. We used a lot of Russian gas around the side last year, by the way, as those sanctions bite. So we could see another spike in energy prices this winter. I don't want it to happen, but I'd be wrong not to point out the possibility. And it's also worth saying, Andrew, that even if we don't have that, energy prices now, say we have annual household bills, £1,800, £2,000. Well, during the 10 years before 2022, they averaged about £1,000. So it's as if we're going back to a steady state, a new normal, where energy bills are roughly twice where they were in real terms before the war in Ukraine. And that is going to impact not just households, it's also going to impact companies, because there's even less subsidy for energy bills for companies. And, of course, that feeds into inflation. This is a major reason why UK inflation is 8 to 10% at the moment, and US inflation is below 5%, because they have much, much cheaper energy bills than we do, not least because they have their own energy supplies, not least frack gas.
Fracking. And, of course, we don't frack. That's Liam Halligan, our business and economics editor. Well, those immigration figures have come through. They're pretty devastating, in my view. 606,000 in the last year. Let's go back to get some more analysis from GBNews Home and Security to Mark White, who's in Dover. Mark, morning. I mean, even though these are at the better end of the expectations, they're still pretty staggeringly high, and I'm conscious that you're standing in Dover, where the Tory party lost control of Dover Council in those local elections a few weeks ago, because I suspect people there are just fed up with promises to stop the boats and turn them back, and they're still pouring in as you stand there right now.
Yeah, 3 boatloads that have come already this morning, 150 people that have come on those small boats across the channel. In the overall figures, though, we've been delving into them, and you clearly are describing what we've got from the Office for National Statistics as being quite staggering. Well, we found some absolutely shocking figures, actually, in the Home Office figures. So they come out in tandem with the ONS figures, but they cover a slightly different period. So the ONS figures are for the calendar year of 2022. The Home Office figures, which we've just got, which are also for a period of a year, are actually running from the end of March 2022 to the end of March this year, so encompassing the first 3 months of this year. And let me just read through these, because they are, I would say, staggering. 235,000 work visas issued were what the ONS said for the whole calendar year of 2022. Well, when you move that on 3 months to March 2023, the Home Office say that 488,000 work visas were issued, and that which, as far as we can see, are not in those ONS headline figures anyway that have come through. On the student visa front, well, the ONS said for the calendar year of 2022, 361,000 student visas were issued, with 85,000 dependents coming. The Home Office figures, taking it to March 2023, 632,000 student visas, including dependents, that have come. That is up 34% on their previous year's figures. Then also add into that humanitarian visas that were issued for Ukraine and Afghanistan and Hong Kong. 172,000 people came across on humanitarian visas in the year to March this year. If you add all of those figures up together, you get way north of 606,000. You get just under 1.3 million people in terms of net migration to the UK in taking into account those Home Office figures, which, as I have to say, knocks it on 3 months. So ONS figures with the whole calendar year of 2022, the Home Office figures knock it on 3 months. So it's the end of March 2022 to the end of March 2023. Some quite astonishing figures when you delve down into it.
Well, Mark, that's why we've got you, and that's why we love you. That's Mark White, our Home and Security Editor in Dover, crunching into those figures. So that is the true headline figure. Actually, the nearly 1.3 million people who came here from overseas last year, offset by the people who left, of course. Now, coming up, there is going to be an urgent question. Of course there is in the House of Commons. Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, will clearly say the Tory party has lost control of migration figures. Be interesting to see if she can tell us how she'd control it. This is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce. My sparring partner, Bev Turner, she is in Boston in Lincolnshire because today we've got them. They've been talked about for ages and ages. The new net migration figures have been published by the government. Oh, my God, 606,000. This from a government that said they were going to cut low migration, well, they used to say it, and when David Cameron was here, to the low tens of thousands. Lots of views coming in. Jan says it's wrong to say that... no, this says this is from Robert, who says big business wants to import cheap labour rather than pay a decent wage. They put pressure on government to continue with mass uncontrolled immigration. Mel in Sunderland says, I recall many years ago when if you were receiving benefits and refused either training or job offers, your benefits were stopped. Scott says, and I agree with you, Scott, 100%, most migrants are just economic migrants. Free houses, free schools, free hospital and dental care. Sue takes a different view. I'm all for legal migration, people who want to live here and contribute and make a good life for themselves. Yvette Cooper, who's the Shadow Home Secretary, she's going to be talking about this in the House of Commons after 10:30. We'll be going live to that. But we're going to go now to Boston in Lincolnshire. Boston, of course, is the Brexit capital of England. Bev Turner is there. Bev.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, good morning, everybody, from Boston in Lincolnshire. Now, we've been looking for people to talk to this morning. Let's have a little walk up the high street here, going towards the Market Square. It's surprisingly hard to find British-born people in Boston to interview. The ones we have found have said they don't really want to talk about the situation. They don't want any trouble bringing to their businesses, perhaps. And I'm just coming along here. We can see there's an Eastern European food shop. This is very typical. A lot of towns in the UK, of course, have Eastern European food shops. And a lot of us would say, yes, of course, we get some benefits from migration in terms of our wonderful and eclectic food options. But I'm joined now by David and Katsusis. Good morning to you both. Now, David, you're not, Paul, sorry, you're not a local as such.
No, not as such. I come from living in Wainfleet, so since July. And it's a lovely area. Yeah. It's a shame that you get into a place like this and it's such a beautiful town, Boston, but there's shops closing down wholesale. They're just closing down. I mean, even the charity shop around the corner, British Heart Foundation, has been on the high street for donkey's years. It's closing. And you've sort of got to wonder, you know, the pressures on people nowadays. If you can't afford to go into a charity shop to buy stuff, that's the reason it's closing down. Or is it the cost of actually running the charity shop, which is the council just ripping people off? I mean, the whole lot. These days, you're just being ripped off. You only got to go into a shop and find out you're being ripped off total. Yeah. But the one thing that is noticeable is you walk down here, most of the people that you can't understand, you know, it's either Polish or Russian or Slovakian or, you know, you name it. And yeah, I appreciate that we need people in our country, but we need to prioritise the inhabitants of this island. We really do. There's no ifs or buts about it. You know, if you're going to have children, your children need to know that, or you need to know that your children have got a future. And if they can't get a job and they can't get B, a house because we can't afford it. I mean, I know I'm not making this thing any better because I've moved from affluent Essex to here to mainly buy a cheap home so I can retire. So I'm not really age of retirement, so I'm living off, you know, the money I've made. But you have to have aspirations, and if people haven't got aspirations, then inherently you've got anger. And the anger will be taken out on all of the foreigners that are around. And it's taking jobs, it's taking houses, and there isn't a cohesive plan to stitch it all together, which is there normally has been a cohesive plan to put everything together, and there isn't. You know, it doesn't matter what you look at, fuel prices, electricity, gas, you know, climate change, yeah. Should we be burning gas? But if the gas is cheaper than the electricity, and they just keep ramping the electricity, you're never going to move away. You know, I've got oil-fired heating, you know, and there isn't a pipeline to connect to gas.
That sense of sort of desperation. You're a local businessman. Yeah. What changes have you seen here? What's your business?
Our business is like flowers, gifts and everything. So over the years, because our shop is running 9 years now, so over the years we noticed that at the start when we opened, because we are like East European, so a lot of English people came to our shop and we noticed that we speaking different languages. They said, oh no, it's not our cup of tea to deal with East European people, and we just left. But with time, when we build up our reputation, people started to notice that our flowers last longer than we buying in marketplace or anything else. So we got more and more people from English side to get our flowers.
Are you finding that you've clearly come here, you've worked hard, you've built a business, which is fantastic. What a lot of the locals complain about is that some of the migrants who are here are not working. They're spending the day sitting in the town square, not going out and earning a wage and paying taxes.
So what I noticed, because we had few customers who came and they came here, got credit cards with like 1,000 limit, for example, and they just living on that credit, and we just like going to work for one day and that's it. So it's really bad for the economy when there's not enough workers. And a few of friends who has like recruitment agencies, they complaining that a lot of people just coming, they want to work easy job, they don't want to have hard work and earn money. So.
And you're originally, are you Polish?
No, I'm from Lithuania.
You're from Lithuania. Why did you come to Boston?
So basically, I came here 15 years ago, and because I have older sister in Lithuania, it's like really hard for like middle class people to send like 2 children to university like one after another. So my plan was to come here, earn money, go back to Lithuania, do like my university studies. But when I spent more time here, I got more information what sort of education I need to get to university here. So I finished access course in Boston College. Then I did further education for HND and HNC and Boston College, and I finished my degree in Newcastle. So it's changed.
What are you doing selling flowers, and if you're an engineer?
It's like it was computer science, but because in our family I'm third generation who works with flowers,
right.
So it's like
you have to keep going with your family ties.
So it's like
we're in a very noisy spot here. Particular apologies if you're listening on the radio. That's the local bus service going through the shopping centre here. But thank you, gentlemen, Paul, and thank you so much for joining us this morning. As you can see, Andrew, it is a complicated picture here. We have local business people who've been here for many years, thanks guys, and have worked hard, have set up businesses. But as you also hear, it feels like there's no cohesive plan. What are the plans for the local kids here in Boston? You heard a little primary school walk past me during that interview. They were very noisy. They were having a great time. But what is the plan for the people in this area? We have a lot of immigration and very little infrastructure. I think we've run out of time, Andrew. I think I'm going back to you.
All right, that's Bev Turner, who's in Boston in Lincolnshire, the Brexit capital of England. It's because, of course, today we've got those migration figures. 606,000 people settled here legally in the last 12 months. Still to come, we'll be live at the Commons as urgent questions have been called into those migration figures. But first, we're getting the news with Rhiannon Jones.
Andrew, thank you. It's 10:34, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Net migration to the UK reached a record level of 606,000 people last year. ONS data shows around 1.2 million long-term migrants entered the country in 2022, with 557,000 leaving. That's despite repeated Conservative pledges to bring overall numbers down. Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says government policy is to blame for the rise in numbers.
Numbers are too high. They need to come down. The reason they've lost control is because they've failed to do enough to invest in skills and talent and career development here in the UK. So employers are being forced to reach for overseas migrant labour because they don't have the pipeline of people that are ready to come and work and attracted as well to the opportunities that are here in the UK.
Well, let's cross live now to the House of Commons, where Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's asking an urgent question on migration.
Promise we made to the British public in our manifesto, and we are unwavering in our determination to deliver it. This week we announced steps to tackle the substantial rise in the number of student dependents coming to the UK. The package of measures will ensure that we can reduce migration whilst continuing to benefit from the skills and resources our economy needs, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business. We expect this package to have a tangible impact on net migration. Taken together with the easing of temporary factors, like our exceptional humanitarian offers, we expect net migration to fall to pre-pandemic levels in the medium term. Mr. Speaker, the public rightly expect us to control our borders, whether that is stopping the boats and addressing illegal migration, or whether it's ensuring levels of legal migration do not place undue pressure on public services, on housing supply or integration. The government is taking decisive action on both counts. Under the points-based system we introduced post-Brexit, we can control immigration, we must control immigration, and we will.
Shadow Home Secretary Vacuum.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's extraordinary figures, including doubling the number of work visas since the pandemic, show that the Conservatives have no plan and no grip on immigration. They show the chaos in this government. Work visas are up 119% since before the pandemic. Conservatives have totally failed to tackle endemic skills shortages and get people back to work. Net migration is more than twice the level that ministers were aiming for, and considerably more than that compared to the Home Secretary's claimed aims. The asylum backlog is at a record high, the opposite of the Prime Minister's promise to clear the backlog this year, and less than 1% of last year's small boat arrivals have had a decision. Yet where is the Home Secretary, who is in charge of these policies? She's gone to ground. There are reports she's not even going to do media. She's not come to this House. She's in internal meetings, presumably more private courses arranged by the civil servants. What is the point of her? Net migration should come down, and we would expect it to do so. But the continued gap between the government's reality and the government's rhetoric and the reality is very damaging. Rightly, the UK has given support to Ukraine and Hong Kongers. Rightly, we welcome international students who bring substantial benefits, but changes on family are sensible. International recruitment will also always be important, so we get the skills and talent we need. But this is a major increase in employers turning to overseas recruitment, and the government has no plan to increase training or properly tackle those skills shortages here at home. So on health and social care, one of the biggest areas, why will he not agree to Labour's plan to increase the training for nurses and doctors in the UK paid for by getting rid of the non-DOMS exemption? Will he ditch the unfair 20% wage discount that means shortage occupations can actually undercut and pay below the going rate, making it even harder to get the training and the skills and the fair recruitment that we need? Everyone should be paid the going rate. Mr. Speaker, there has been no action at all to address the huge backlog in the asylum system and to make sure that claims are properly processed. Immigration is important to this country, and we need a system that works. But it has to be properly controlled and managed, rather than the chaos that the government has created.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Labour Party feigns interest in cutting net migration, but I can assure the Right Honourable Lady that nobody is buying it. Last week, the chair of the Labour Party said that under Labour, net migration would go up in the short term. The leader of the Labour Party stood on a campaign pledge to defend freedom of movement if the UK remained outside of the EU. He said that there is a racist undercurrent which permeates all immigration laws. Does the Shadow Home Secretary agree with them? At every possible opportunity, Labour have voted against every measure that this government has brought forward to control migration. They voted against ending free movement, and at every turn they voted against measures to tackle illegal migration. Just recently they voted against the illegal migration bill, because the truth is, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party have no interest in controlled and orderly migration. The Conservative Party is taking tangible steps to bring down net migration. Yesterday, we took a decisive step to clamp down on student dependence, because universities should be selling education, not immigration. Belatedly, the Shadow Home Secretary says she agrees with that. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party made a solemn promise to the British public to reduce net migration. Thanks to Brexit, we now have the tools at our disposal to do that. We can and we must deliver.
File the House to Peter Bottomley.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, I'm sorry that while he was replying to the questions, 4 of the front benchers were talking at the same time. I think that was to disguise the fact that their speaker appeared to agree with virtually every sensible element of the government's immigration and control policy. Can I ask my right honourable friend if he'll agree with me that if we go to beyond the Admission Order Office, there's the memorial plaque for the kinder transport. Some of those who feel most strongly against immigration now feel proud of what we did then. We have to remember that then and now, there are tens of millions of people around the world suffering because of violence in their own countries. Others who have bad governments to stop them allowing to have economic success where they are.
That's Peter Bottomley, who's the Leader of the House and one of the more pompous members of the House of Commons. Sam Lister, who's with me, political editor of the Daily Express. You know him very well, very nice, but he's slightly pompous, lovely man. And Carol Malone is here, of course, who needs no introduction to GB News viewers and listeners. Carol, first of all, Robert Jenrick, the Immigration Minister, it's fine to attack Labour that they would let even more people in and say they have dead policies, but we want to know what they're going to do to stop this.
Yeah, well, we do. First, let's address Yvette Cooper there. This just makes me laugh when people like her go on about immigration. Every time, and Jenrick just said it, every time the government has a plan to deal with immigration, illegal or otherwise, Labour stop it. And if it's not the Labour politicians, it's the lefty lawyers who try to stop it. But you're right. What's happening now is Jenrick is talking about what we're going to do, as is Suella, but nothing is actually happening. And I just, if they have a chance of winning the next election, they have to at least stop the boats. And if they don't do that, they're done for. We're starting to look like, Priti Patel was ridiculed in the end because nothing happened over immigration, and that was not her fault. I suspect that was the Prime Minister of the day's fault for not actually backing her. And now we have a situation where Suella is talking a big game, and no one's really backing her. Rishi is saying this is his mission, this is what he's going to do. We're saying nothing.
Now, Sam, if you get into the reads of the figures, actually the total long-term migration into Britain in the last year was 1.2 million.
It's astonishing.
1.2 million. You have to offset them with the people who leave, students who go back. And of that, 925,000 were non-EU nationals. Now, look, there are extenuating circumstances. Ukrainians came here on compassion.
Yes, completely.
The same with Hong Kong.
And they will go back.
But that doesn't account for 1.2 million.
No, and I think this is a massive problem for the government because actually, although they do focus on stopping the boats, and that is the big kind of electoral issue, people voted for Brexit because they wanted control of our borders.
Exactly.
This is us having control of our borders. It's more than 1 million, as you say, 1.2 million.
That's
this
the population
is
of a major city.
Exactly. And if this continues year after year after year, within 10 years, you get to the size of the City of London.
You do.
And this is not sustainable. Most people don't think that is sustainable.
And
neither the government or the Labour Party, clearly the Labour Party are not the party who are going to tackle this, but the government is really struggling.
I think there is an argument for students to come, but what there is not an argument for is for students to bring 5, 6, 7 dependents with them.
135,000 dependents last year.
And we know that there are certain races of people who bring. The Chinese don't bring that many dependents. I think Indians do bring 5 or 6 or 7 people. There has to be a line drawn under that. Why do you need 6 or 7 members of your family here if you're the kind of student who's going to come and then go back at the end of your course?
This is something they're trying to crack down on, and but it will only still make a small dent in the figures. And ultimately, you've got a row in the cabinet between those in the cabinet who want big migration numbers because it's good for the economy, and those who obviously clearly want to
and look, the front page of the Telegraph headline today: millions on jobless benefits don't have to seek work. It does my head in. We've got 1.4 million people unemployed, and we've got 2.5 million people on long-term sick. Why have we got 2.5 million on long-term sick? We're a prosperous country.
That's right. I thought we were talking about that in the second half, but that story is incredible because it's saying that the 4 million people who are not working may never have to look for work because they're citing mental health issues and joint problems. Can you believe it? I mean, it's beyond belief.
And I mean, that is a big problem, isn't it? Ian Duncan-Smith, through his Centre for Social Justice, has been campaigning on this issue for year after year. And if more people locally worked, we would need so much. We would need far fewer of these people of the 1.2 million who came in last year.
And actually, you know, work is good for people. Ultimately, getting up in the morning, going out to work, it's good for your mental health. It is good. It has a beneficial health effect. And so, you know, really, the way to tackle these problems, immigration, mental health issues, all that kind of stuff, is to find ways to get people back into work.
And wouldn't it be great if we said to some of these people when they cross the channel in the boats, OK, you're going in this hostel, but by the way, you're going to for your food and lodge, you see that field of cabbages and potatoes.
You're going to pick that.
You're picking them.
It's
and
true.
You're not getting paid.
I don't understand why that's...
Yeah,
I don't understand why that's not happening. Somebody attacked me on television the other day.
That's not unusual.
That's true. But I mean, that is true. Because I had said, you know, make British people who don't work, make them go and pick the fruit in the field. Somebody said to me, well, you wouldn't do it. I said, well, no, because I've got a job. I'm contributing to the economy. But these people aren't. So it should be, for me, it should be 3 strikes and you're out. You get offered 3 jobs, and if you don't do one of those jobs, you get a benefits job.
I'm sure when I was growing up, that's what happened. You didn't work, you didn't go for job interviews, you lost your benefits.
Completely. And the thing is, you know, when I was growing up, and I think we've all grown up in very working class areas, you know, I had to get a job. You know, even when I was at school, I had to get a job to help my parents because they didn't have money to give me. And that kind of work ethic is drummed into you from a very early age. And I think a lot of these people who aren't choosing to work, they're never going to want to work. You know, we've got a generation now that has never, ever worked, and neither have their parents. And I remember as a young journalist seeing this and thinking, interviewing people and thinking, my God, you've never worked, your mum and dad have never worked. Think how many generations now that is. That's 4 generations of people at my age now that have never worked and never will.
We know that the Stop the Boats policy is getting into all sorts of difficulties in the House of Lords. I'm told if the Supreme Court gives it the go-ahead, the government think they could start getting those boats up, those planes in the air, Sam, to Rwanda by September. But what are we going to do? What is the government going to do if the European Court, an anonymous judge at 9 o'clock at night says, no, if you send that flight, it's illegal? Are we going to ignore it?
I mean, this is the thing. Actually, a lot of Conservative MPs think we already have the power to ignore it.
We do.
And, you know, the government has to make that decision.
French do it all the time.
Exactly. And I think the government, it's only got a year till the next election in effect. It has to have this moment. It has to have this moment and demonstrate to people that actually something is happening on this. And so, you know, I would imagine that those conversations will be going on. They have to get a plane off the tarmac.
And I still think it is. I still think it will be a deterrent. One of my colleagues was in Ireland covering the huge problems they've got in Ireland with migrants, and he talked to them some, and he said, why are you in Ireland? We don't want to go to Rwanda.
Well, do you not remember the week that the plan was announced and before it was actually stopped? The boat crossings were much less. People weren't getting on the boat.
Because they actually thought when a government said it's going to do something, it might actually do it.
So that was 1 week. And imagine if that became the norm. It would stop it. And that's all the Rwanda thing is about. I don't think there's any real appetite to be sending plane loads of people over there. I think the whole point of it is it's a deterrent. We need to get a couple off, and then I think people will go somewhere else.
Should Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, was ultimately responsible for this, and she's been making the loudest noises in the Cabinet about getting migration. She's not appearing in public anywhere today. We know finally she got it right and said she doesn't need to have any action against her over that completely manufactured row about speeding awareness courses. Shouldn't she have been in the Commons today, unrepentant, taking them on?
Yeah, it's interesting because actually I think you're going to see Rishi Sunak speaking and he wants to actually get out there and talk about these figures. I think they massively overbriefed them. They said it's going to be 1 million, it's 700,000 to 1 million. Obviously it's 600,000. So people are thinking actually
still
it's not
too
as
many.
We thought.
But it's still too many.
But actually, I think he's taking the front foot on this today. That's interesting because obviously Suella Braverman has become this very powerful figure now in the Cabinet. She's virtually unsackable now.
I agree.
She would have to do something extraordinary now to be...
Quite capable of it. She's quite capable of that.
She is.
There is that.
I mean, I think she's been kept out the way today because people would not be looking at those immigration figures particularly. They'll be attacking her. People like Yvette Cooper last week actually said she had broken the code. She hasn't broken the code. We all knew she hadn't. done. But Yvette Cooper was saying last week, she not only broke the code, she broke the law. No, she didn't.
Yeah.
She did exactly what most public figures would have done.
And the Prime Minister spoke to his ethics advisor, Sir
Laurie Magnus.
Yeah, and no further action.
But you know what? I was really disappointed that Sunak did that. I was really disappointed that he actually even put it with Laurie Magnus, because all you do then is give power and credence to the fact that she might have done something wrong. He should have said right at the start she did nothing wrong. She asked an aide to make an inquiry. That's all she did. She wasn't asking to get off with it. She wasn't trying to dodge the points or the fine. And, you know, she ended up taking the points. She shouldn't have, because everyone is entitled to do that course.
Yeah, they are.
It's a very Rishi Sunak thing to do, though. It's very Rishi. It's like
very
process.
Yeah.
Everything's by the book. Everything's about showing people that we are following the letter of...
And it was the Blob Civil Service was after her. They got Dominic Raab, in my view, the Justice Secretary. Next time you're in, we're going to talk about Boris Johnson, because they've made a concerted attempt to get Boris Johnson.
This is
again, in my view, these totally manufactured allegations that he broke the lockdown code on up to a dozen occasions. Files handed to the police. Files handed to the police.
It is
anybody telling.
Well, no one told Boris. That's for sure.
That was going to happen.
Do you think the hand of the paw prints of Oliver Dowden is on this?
If you've read a piece in the Daily Mail...
I have read your piece.
Fabulous.
Let's all look at Pierce's piece today in the Daily Mail. Very good piece.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Boris has been royally stitched up. We're going to talk about that a little more.
Yeah.
Just finally, Sam, how damaging is this for Rishi Sunak, these figures?
I think it is very, very difficult for him. It's a very difficult position he's in now, because they've promised to bring down immigration, but they won't say by when, and they won't say by how many, you know, what they want to bring it down to. So, you know, we started off with bringing down migration to the tens of thousands, and obviously we're going up and up and up, and there is no solution in sight. So I think it's difficult.
Yeah, Carol, do you think he's damaged?
Yeah, I think he's going to... He needs to find his cojones on almost everything. And actually, you know, you talked about Suella before. He didn't come quick enough to her aid, I thought. He didn't show the kind of confidence in her he should. And he's not doing what he should over immigration. People want to see him doing something strong and decisive, and he's not doing it.
And of course, she would, if she had been in the Commons days, she might have been saying, well, I want to do this, I want to do that.
She would have got the headlines. There's no question.
I've been blocked here, there and everywhere by other colleagues.
I don't know how she gets out of bed every day. I don't, because the stuff that she gets, never mind, you know, in the Commons, the stuff that she gets his will on Twitter, in the media, in certain sections of the media, I don't know how she gets out of bed and does her job.
I tell you what, though, the letters page of the Daily Express is absolutely full of support for Suella.
I'm sure it is.
Completely.
And I think their stock is rising all the time.
But I think the country's supporter, I think the majority of the country, especially those areas that have been affected by mass immigration, I think they support her. But we don't hear enough about that from the media generally.
Well, that's Carol Malone and Sam Minister. They're going to be with me again in the next hour. Thanks to you both. We're going to go back to Bev Turner, who's, of course, in Boston, the Brexit capital of England. Bev, what are the papers saying over there, Bev? Morning.
Good morning, all. Sorry I can't be there, but it is rather pleasant here in Boston this morning, despite the fact that this is a town that obviously has all sorts of tensions that we've been discussing this morning. Looking at the local paper, and it references, one of the stories is about a dispersal order, which has basically been put in place in this particular area because of gangs of basically young men just sort of hanging around. So the police have new powers that if there are 2 or more people hanging around, they can just be moved on because of the risk of antisocial behaviour, and also just the fact that so many locals here have described just not feeling very safe. I was talking to one elderly gentleman who sat on the bench having a bacon butty this morning, who was saying, he said, I only come into town in the morning. I don't feel safe here in the afternoon and the evening. He's born and bred, lived in Boston his whole life. And then, of course, a story that Nigel Farage has covered many times on GB News, which is about the Scampton RAF base, which is also, of course, in Lincolnshire, not very far from here, with the residents prepared to leave, they say, if migrants start to move in. So this is very typical of the tensions that are clear in this area. And what also, Andrew, has occurred to me is when I'm talking to the locals here and they're saying, why is GB News here today? and we say, well, there is record immigration figures. And they sort of laugh and say, well, 99% of those 600,000, I think, are in this one town, because that's what it feels like for them a lot of the time. And many of them complaining really about the language barrier and saying, when somebody comes into my shop in the morning, they don't say hello, we can't make conversation with them. And that's what they find quite frustrating as well here. So it's a shock for people here because they voted for Brexit. 75% of people here voted for Brexit. But there's also a sense that they are just disillusioned, apathetic. They've sort of given up. The ones who won't talk to us, and there are a lot who won't talk to us because they're concerned about implications of maybe payback on their businesses, perhaps. But they just say, what's the point? What is the point? Because nothing is changing, and there's a sense of despondency and desperation about the situation as we sit in a formerly really beautiful town that's clearly really struggling. But I think it's time for a quick break. I will be staying here. I'm at the Seventh Heaven Cafe in Boston. If you are around in the area, do come and say hello to GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This is To the Point with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. Well, they've hit a new record high figure, 606,000 net migration in the last 12 months. Staggering, isn't it? Labour says it shows the government's lost control. We're going to be hearing from Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Bev's live in Lincolnshire. And a big drop in energy prices as the cap comes down, but costs are still well above where they were before the cost of living crisis began. And hundreds of people are expected to attend the funeral of a World War II RAF man. Peter Brown, originally from Jamaica, he was one of the last so-called pilots of the Caribbean, a group of Afro-Caribbean volunteers who served in uniform in World War II.
That's right, I'm here in Boston. You can hear the bells from St Botolph's Church behind me just ringing out at 11 o'clock this morning. But of course, the big news here is that net migration has hit 600,000, which for a town that considers itself to be the Brexit capital of the country has been greeted as bad news. More on that after your news with Rhiannon Jones.
Thank you, Bev. Good morning. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 11, your top stories from the GB newsroom. Net migration to the UK reached a record level of 606,000 people last year. ONS data shows around 1.2 million long-term migrants entered the country in 2022, with 557,000 leaving. That's despite repeated Tory pledges to bring overall numbers down. Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says government policy is to blame for the rise in numbers.
Numbers are too high. They need to come down. The reason they've lost control is because they've failed to do enough to invest in skills and talent and career development here in the UK. So employers are being forced to reach for overseas migrant labour because they don't have the pipeline of people that are ready to come and work and attracted as well to the opportunities that are here in the UK.
Rishi Sunak has welcomed the reduction in the energy price cap, describing it as a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to a maximum of £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Ofgem says the first price drop in 18 months reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. Security guards at Heathrow Airport are beginning a 3-day strike over pay on what's expected to be one of the busiest days of the year for air travel. Heathrow says it may take longer than usual to get through security, but claims it has contingency plans in place to minimise disruption. Members of the Unite Union have already held 15 days of industrial action, including over the Easter holidays. A man who was once paralysed can now walk again thanks to new technology. Gert-Jan Oxcom is back on his feet with crutches thanks to a new device that connects his brain and spinal cord. The 40-year-old Dutchman was paralysed for 10 years after a spinal injury. Mr. Oxcom can also walk short distances without the device if he uses crutches. 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it! Members of the public expressed dismay as the woman climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the RBC Brew and Dolphin Garden. One woman turned a hosepipe on the protesters before Met Police officers arrived at the scene. A teenage TikToker has apologised after being handed a criminal behaviour order for a social media prank. Bakari Bronzagaro appeared at Thames Magistrates Court yesterday after he recorded himself entering someone's home without permission. The 18-year-old had pleaded guilty to failing to comply with a community protection notice. He did later apologise, saying he was having fun but did feel bad. He's been fined £365. Patients will be given more choice and greater control over their own care with a new NHS app as part of government plans to tackle waiting lists. After speaking with their GP, they'll be offered information on up to 5 healthcare providers. They can then choose where they'd like to go for treatment. Research shows a patient's waiting time can be cut by up to 3 months by selecting a different hospital in the same region. And tributes continue to pour in for one of rock and roll's most famous stars. Tina Turner has died at the age of 83.
You're simply the best. Better than all the rest.
In a career spanning over 60 years, the American singer sold more than 180 million albums and won 12 Grammys. Mick Jagger's called her inspiring, warm, funny and generous. Tom Jones describing her as one of a kind. The actress who plays Tina at the Tina Turner musical in London says the superstar would bring a huge party to heaven. No doubt the audience at the West End musical has been reacting to the sad news.
Well, we were just overwhelmed. I think everybody was just so emotional. We didn't know how to react, really, did we?
What an amazing story of resilience, of female empowerment.
I brought probably the best bouquet of flowers you can buy because she simply was the best.
What's love got to do? It's got to do with who needs a heart when the heart can be broken.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Beth.
Good morning. I am here in Boston, in Lincolnshire. Of course, immigration is of particular interest to this town. 75% of people here voted for Brexit. That was a long 7 years ago. They have seen changes, yes, but not, it seems, for the better in this part of England. I'm joined now by Anton, who is the owner of the Café de Paris, a coffee shop in the area. Now, you are the positive face of immigration to this country. You've built up a business. You were the former mayor. You're currently a councillor. But how disappointed are you when you look at this town today and see how it's changing?
Well, is it very disappointing because what we voted for has backfired. We voted for Brexit. We voted for control of our borders. And unfortunately, our borders, they are more open now, and the demographic, situation in Boston is changing big time. I mean, it's not suitable for us. Our infrastructure are not able to support the influx of migrants coming at the moment. Our fly tipping has increased. Our rubbish littering in the town has increased. I mean, you look around me, and if I'm a tourist to come and take a picture around the memorial of Immigrant Memorial, I would be very worried to bring probably my kids, my wife, my partner, whoever with me. It doesn't look nice, and people are here all day. So.
If we just allow Emil, our cameraman, just to pan back a little bit, this particular square here, in the shadow of this beautiful, absolutely stunning architecture of St Botolph's Church here in Lincolnshire, but this is known locally as Foreigner Island, with sort of one of the ladies was telling me last night, sort of joking, but she said there is all from day to morning till night. This is full of people who are not locals, who spend a lot of time not at work, just sitting around here in the day. How much of a problem is this area?
Well, it is a problem, as I stated. It will be very difficult for a tourist to go through. In the evening, you will be intimidated. In the daytime, you will be intimidated. If you can just focus on these 2 pots of flowers, they should be straight. Somebody has sat on them and just bent them. They are tilted basically to the same side. So it shows you the kind of damage they cause. And, soon we will have a lot of litter around the chairs. They throw bread, they throw packages, and it's not nice for us in town. Yes.
And if we just walk through the market square here now, you have market day twice a week, I believe, Wednesday and Saturday.
Yes,
that must be still the heart of the community. Is it very different now than it was a few years ago?
Yes, it is very difficult because unfortunately the people who used to come and shop, most of them the elderly and people from villages, now because they feel intimidated and they don't feel comfortable coming to town, they don't come to town. I have some traders on Wednesday market and on Saturday, they don't come for one reason. There's a lot of shoplifting. So they don't deal with it, and because we have lack of presence of police all the time, and we don't have enough funds in this town, so we deal with what we can.
That was a shocking fact that I found. We'll just keep walking down here, Anton. Is that this area in Lincolnshire has one of the most underfunded police forces in the country here.
Yes, and we keep fighting for the funds to be. We need more police. I think in Lincolnshire just last, probably last year or probably 4 months ago, they took 40 PCOs. They took 40 off. Are we that comfortable? Are we living, in a very safe community? Do you see we are safe in this community? Have you talked to anyone? Did anybody say good morning to you? Somebody respond to you in a good manner? No. Very rude people, very aggressive people. They are in groups. I tell you the truth, even as a man, when they are in front of my coffee shop and you tell them, listen, you cannot do that. And they just say, what? And you're facing 2 or 3 guys. So does it make the town better? I choose to live in Boston because I thought I give a safe place to myself, my kids and my family. So I would like it to be safe for everyone coming to Boston, tourists, people who visit us. And like you said, we have a beautiful monument. We have the stamp, we have the history, we have few shops here. But unfortunately, they are not feeling anybody, feeling any vibe from it.
Okay, well, thank you, Anton. I'm just going to go and put the kettle on. I want another coffee in a minute. But no, I'm just going to talk to Alice now. Now, April. You're the owner of a local bridal shop.
That's correct, yes.
How has the demographic change in this area affected your business?
I would say it's changed in the sense that I have a wide variety of people and nationalities visit my bridal shop. So for me, I personally like that as I'm helping everybody find their wedding dress. Yeah.
And are you finding that in this area people are looking for staff and that businesses like yours would struggle without immigration?
I would say it's harder for me. I have run 2 businesses. I also run a fitness business as well. And I have a lot of sort of different nationalities come and support my business. So I'm very, very grateful for that.
So from your point of view, on the whole, the immigration to the area is positive?
From my point of view, yes. From a business point of view, I mean, I try and support other people's businesses and they support mine. So I think if there's that sort of nice equal balance, then that is helpful, yeah.
I'm wondering if this is partly, you see it like that, maybe because you're slightly younger. So some of the more elderly residents I've been chatting to this morning who are very unnerved by the rapid change of the demographic, and they say they just don't even feel safe coming into the town anymore.
Yes, I think that is an issue. That is not just an issue within Boston here. I think it is everywhere, unfortunately, due to sort of changes within the government, and sort of policing is also a massive problem. So I think if that was dealt with, I think it would create a safer environment for everybody.
I mean, we were here yesterday evening having a bite to eat and a drink, and everything was sort of closed down quite early. I know that's not exclusive. We know we're in a small northern town. It's not like the centre of London where everything's open until 3 o'clock in the morning. But it was very much felt like it was very quiet. Like there's not a lot to do. Like where would you go out in this area in the evenings?
I've been out a few times in this area in the evenings. It has changed a lot, and obviously as you get older you sort of change what you do within an evening. But it is a shame because I think there used to be more bars and more restaurants, but with the cost of living crisis, I think that has changed dramatically where people spend their extra money.
Yeah. And what's the bridal shop called, April?
It's called 8 Moon Bridal.
Perfect, there we go. We don't mind giving you a plug. Lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning. If you want to come down here to the Market Square in Boston, do come and say hello to GB News. Obviously, we are very much in support of Nigel Farage. He drove the Brexit campaign. And this is the Brexit capital of the country. But we are reflecting today and the rest of today on GB News on those new immigration figures, which are shocking for the people of Boston. Andrew, back to you.
All right, that's Bev Turner. She's going to be in Boston. We're going to be in Boston throughout the programme and, in fact, throughout the day. Now, in other big news, Ofgem has announced it's to lower its energy price cap from the current £3,280 a year to £2,074 for the average household. That will be from July the 1st. Do you want me to break down the figures and to explain what it means? As the former advisor to the UK Secretary of State for International Trade and the Chief Executive of Compete, Shankar Singham. Morning to you.
Good morning. How are you, Andrew?
Very well. Now, we know that wholesale prices, energy prices are falling, Shankar. So the price cap is also being reduced. Is this going to mean people watching and listening are going to be paying less in real terms for their gas and electricity?
Yeah, so I think it is good news that Ofgem has seen fit to lower the price cap. I would make an initial comment that price caps in general are not economists don't tend to favour them as a mechanism to generate more competition and lower consumer prices, because the cap tends to have adverse effects on production, and it tends to cause some entrants in the market to exit. So long term, a price cap is generally not a good idea. It generally hasn't worked. Now, having said that, obviously we are supportive of anything that lowers energy costs. Energy costs are a massive burden for UK consumers and also UK businesses. But it isn't just about Ofgem lowering the price cap. It's also about all the other things. And there isn't any one single silver bullet that's going to solve the energy problem in the UK or indeed elsewhere. You need to do lots of different things. Some of those things involve producing more. Some of those things involve dealing with our interconnection policies into the grid. And you want to do everything possible to lower the costs of production and transmission and distribution of energy around the country.
Shankar, wholesale prices are falling. Are we ever going to see energy prices in our homes as they were before COVID, before the war in Ukraine?
Well, it very much depends on what we do. I mean, I don't see a reason why we can't have lower energy costs going forward, but that will require significant energy reform in the UK. Now, one of the good things about the recently announced regulatory reform package that Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Kemi Badenoch, announced recently was an effort to deal with this and to reform across the board in different areas of energy regulation to ensure that we can lower those costs. It's a crucial issue because it's one of those things that if your energy costs are very high, then everything that you do is more expensive. Your food is more expensive, your transportation is more expensive, everything is more expensive, and your businesses can't be competitive. So it's a real priority to do this. And I think with some of these energy reforms that are coming, we will see more competition and lower prices going forward.
I know you're pressed for time. I was just going to ask you about that. I'm glad you raised that. The cost of transportation. We saw in those inflation figures yesterday, which frankly were disappointing, down to 8.7% from 10.1%. I thought it was going to be closer to 8%. But food inflation, Shankar, still way up there at 19.1%. Fuel costs, I understand, are a big part of that.
Absolutely. No. For different sectors, energy is a different component in the mix. So if you're producing steel, for example, almost half of the cost of production of steel is your energy cost. If you're moving food around the country, then obviously your transportation costs are a huge component of the cost. Now, one of the things that happened with the Russian invasion of Ukraine is it led to shortages of things like fertilizer and so forth, and that meant that the costs for farmers went up significantly, and that cost had to be sent on to the passed on to the consumer. So what you want to do in order to lower overall inflation in the UK is deal with those sectors that are almost the lifeblood areas of the economy, the things that if they remain very expensive, you really can't lower the costs of those basic staples of family life. So energy is sort of top of the list, but you need to also figure out ways of lowering your transportation costs, your land costs, planning and so forth, and it's only if you do that you can lower the sort of basket of people's weekly shopping. You can lower those costs to a more manageable amount.
All right, that's Shankar Singham, who is, of course, Chief Executive of Computair. Thanks so much for joining us. Lots of views coming in here, particularly on the migration figures. Hannah says, I've got mixed views on this issue. I'm married to a Brazilian. My wife came legally to the UK a decade ago, got a work visa, and has been contributing to the UK economy ever since. And Steve says, almost every problem we have is down to mass immigration. We've voted repeatedly to stop moving people here. And we're being ignored. You're right. Now, still to come, we'll be at the funeral of a World War II RAF airman, Peter Brown. It's a very significant figure in our army history. This is GB News. I'm Andrew Rees.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 11:23. You're with Andrew Pearce on GB News and Bev Turner, who is in Lincolnshire. She is in Boston, which is the Brexit capital of England, as we digest those pretty damned appalling immigration figures. Record net migration in the last 12 months, 606,000. That is a small city. Now, interesting story now. The funeral of one of the last so-called pilots of the Caribbean is set to take place. Flight Sergeant Peter Brown was born in Jamaica. He joined the RAF in 1943. Our London reporter, Lisa Hartle, is there for us now. Morning, Lisa.
Hello. Yes. Well, the hearse with Peter Brown arrived here just moments ago. The story behind this is basically when he passed away in December, a funeral was planned for him to take place in March in Mortlake Crematorium. But when there was an appeal put out, because he wasn't in touch with any members of his family, an appeal was put out to try and find members of his family. The council was contacted by so many people wanting to attend his funeral that they had to postpone it and move it to a much larger location, which is where we are now. This is the RAF Central Church in central London. It can hold 600 people. Hundreds of people are inside now for the funeral service. Peter trained as a wireless operator and gunner, flying in Lancaster bombers, and after the war he re-enlisted as a signaller. And as you said, he was one of those people who came over from the Caribbean, volunteered. Some of them actually paid their own way across to get here to volunteer during the war. Peter died aged 96 in Maida Vale in December, and I've spoken to some of his friends and they've described him as a bright spark, someone who, one of those rare people that you come across in life that just makes you feel good being around them. He was He was a keen cricketer, fan of cricket. He had many friends, and his friends say that although he wasn't in touch with members of his family, he was never lonely and he was well loved within his community.
All right, that's Lisa Hartle at that funeral. We'll keep you up to date on that story. Now, lots of views coming in. Of course they are on the migration figures. Of course they're coming in because people are flipping furious with good reason. Susan says, this is only net migration. How many Brits have left the UK? Just to be clear, the figures show 606,000 people. That is net migration into the country last year. But total number of people coming into Britain last year was 1.2 million. 1.2 million. Then you have to take into account people who moved abroad, people who left the country. Many of them, of course, were students. The composition of non-EU migration has changed dramatically. In 2020, it was 39% last year, 47% the year after that. The number of people coming from the EU, because, of course, we got rid of free movement of people, is 151,000. Of course, a lot of people arrived on humanitarian visas. I think Ukraine, up to 20% over the same period. Also, of course, we allowed a lot of people to come in on humanitarian reasons from Hong Kong, a former British colony. And that, of course, is because of the appalling crackdown on human rights and democracy in Hong Kong by China. The students, of course, are a large reason why, foreign students are a large part of why those figures are so high. Evidence suggests they typically stay for shorter periods. But can anybody tell me why the government is only now saying students who come here from abroad are not allowed to bring their dependents? They brought in 135,000 dependents in the last 12 months. Why? And why are they only getting rid of it now? The government will be quietly quite pleased about these figures, frankly, because we've been led to believe the figures could be between 750,000 and 900,000. But don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. It's spin. It's too high. 606,000 is not what we wanted. In the Tory manifesto in 2015, when immigration was mentioned 29 times, I counted today, it was going to be in the low tens of thousands. What are people saying to us? Daniel in Harlow says the only way illegal immigration can be paused is to stop allowing them free houses, free benefits, free education and free healthcare. Leslie says we need information on the number of Brits leaving with breakdown by nationality, and I worry about the exodus of our own skilled professionals. And Paul says these problems have been going on for years, with local communities suffering from unwanted immigration, but nobody will listen. And of course, our own Bev Turner is in today. She is in Boston, in Lincolnshire. They voted with 75% in favour of Brexit back in that referendum in 2016. Free movement of people was a huge part of that. And from what Bev's hearing on the streets of Boston, they ain't too impressed by the fact 606,000 people more came last year. Now, still to come, we're going to be speaking to our very own Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's going to crunch down those immigration figures. He'll also have something interesting to say, because there is a positive Brexit story. A major new car factory is expected to be announced in the West Country by the government next year. We beat Spain to get it. If only we'd beaten the Germans too. That's all coming up after your morning news with Rhiannon Jones.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning. It's coming up to 11:30. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Net migration to the UK reached a record level of 606,000 people last year. Data released by the Office for National Statistics shows around 1.2 million long-term migrants entered the country in 2022, with 557,000 leaving. That's despite repeated Tory government's pledges to bring overall numbers down. Stephen Kinnock is the Shadow Immigration Minister. He told us government policy is to blame for the rise in numbers.
Numbers are too high. They need to come down. The reason they've lost control is because they've failed to do enough to invest in skills and talent and career development here in the UK. So employers are being forced to reach for overseas migrant labour because they don't have the pipeline of people that are ready to come and work and attracted as well to the opportunities that are here in the UK.
Rishi Sunak has welcomed the reduction in the energy price cap, saying it's a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Currently, the government's price guarantee limits a typical bill to around £2,500. Ofgem says the reduction reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. It's the first price drop in 18 months due to the global gas crisis.
God's sake! No! Stop it!
3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show. One woman climbed over a rope and threw orange paint over the RBC Brew and Dolphin Garden. Another turned a hose pipe on the protesters before Met Police officers arrived at the scene. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Bev and Andrew will be back in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2377 and €1.1535. The price of gold is £1,585.57 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,615 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
For Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:36 on To The Point on GB News, where we've been talking all morning about those shocking migration figures. They're not good, 606,000. Let's speak to our very own Jacob Rees-Mogg of this parish and, of course, former Conservative Cabinet Minister. Jacob, will these figures have caused a row in the Cabinet? And if they haven't, why haven't they?
Oh, I think it's clear that there's a full and frank discussion going on in the Cabinet, that I think we all know that Suella Braverman wants to bring these figures down, that she is making that case very strongly. She wants to stick to the commitment made in the manifesto, not just for 2019, but all the way back to 2010, and that there are others who want to keep these high levels going.
Then, of course, we know is the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, because she wants to get more foreign students into universities. But the chance of this, Jacob, do you think he's keen for cheap labour to continue to pour in? Because we can't get British people to take the jobs?
I don't know the Chancellor's view, but I do know the Treasury view.
Yeah.
The Treasury view is that immigration grows the economy and therefore you want to have a high level of migration, and that the OBR figures are based on 250,000 migration, and that they are dependent on the dreadful, wrong, false OBR forecasts on how they make economic policy decisions, including tax and spend. So the Treasury is in the grip of error in this regard, in my view, because migration may lead to GDP growth, but not to GDP per capita growth, because quite a number of people coming in are coming in well below the average earnings for this country.
And of course, these Treasury wallers with their flow charts and their Venn diagrams, Jacob, they don't live in towns like Boston, where Bev Turner is today, where there is the population is something like 29% migrant, and there are real issues with social cohesion. That's one of the real downsides of this huge increase in migration to this country, and that's notwithstanding the pressure on hospitals and schools.
I think that's absolutely right. We used to say that they don't get out of Whitehall, but I'm not sure they now get out of their own homes, because they're all working from home and not engaging with the real world. And I think that is a problem. I also think there is a deep-seated problem with thinking that migration is the answer, because it means that you then become dependent on low-priced labour, which people who were born here don't go into because it doesn't pay enough, and certainly doesn't pay enough compared to benefits. It remains low price. The only way to fill it is with migration, and therefore you get a vicious cycle, that you get more migration because you've made areas low-wage areas. And what you need to do, which has happened so successfully with HGV drivers, is get wages up so that people in this country already want to train and take those jobs.
Jacob, if I could ask you just finally, we don't hear enough, in my view, about the upsides of Brexit. On the front page of the Daily Express today, coming to the UK, car plant deal worth billions. Britain's won a battle with Spain to persuade Jaguar Land Rover owner Tata to bring in a multi-billion-pound car factory down your neck of the woods in Somerset. How do you react to that?
In Somerset, well, it's brilliant news, and you know who ought to get the credit for this? It's Liz Truss, because she was working very hard on this deal in her time as Prime Minister, along with Mark Fulbrook, her Chief of Staff. They were seeing Tata, discussing with Tata, working out a package for Tata, and it's absolutely marvellous that this has been successful, and it's integrated. So you've got a battery plant there, but you've also got Hinkley Point, so you've got the electricity, and the planners are on side. Somerset Council has been very supportive of this, so it really shows joined-up government for once, and the credit goes to Liz.
Somerset MP, and of course GB News presenter who'll be here at 8 p.m. today. Let's go back to Boston to see what people are telling Bev about these appalling immigration figures. Bev.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm here with Dimitri, who's Bulgarian. He doesn't have a huge amount of English, but I really wanted to talk to some of the immigrants who are here. Hello, Dimitri. Thank you. So tell me, how long have you been in Boston?
2 months. No, 4 months. I'm like Boston. It's very good. I'm work chicken. Very good Boston, like you.
Yeah.
Stay here 2 months. Go Bulgaria.
Okay. So you work in the chicken factories here. We have a lot of poultry. Quite a big proportion of the British poultry actually that we eat is prepared here, is grown and slaughtered here. And so you've been here for 4 months. You're going to stay for 2 more months. And do you work here and then send money home to Bulgaria?
I don't know.
But and you want to be here for 6 months?
Yes.
And you have family, girlfriend in Bulgaria?
Family, my Bulgaria. My mom said this. Yeah. Boston, England. Yes.
Yeah. But why Boston? Why here, not London, Birmingham, Manchester?
I don't know. This work good, not chicken.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for talking to us. Thank you. Look, this is kind of what we hear, is that the work that is available here for people who are happy to work on low wages. It's tough work, working in the fields, working in the chicken factories. It's not the kind of work, actually, that we're hearing that a lot of the local teenagers in this area want to do. So people like Dimitri are coming over. But in numbers which are so vast, which we're hearing from the local community, is causing issues with integration and cohesion. And as you saw there, Dimitri was doing his best. We had a little conversation via Google Translate before I spoke to him, just to try and work it out. But he was really struggling. Like, he didn't have enough English to have a full conversation with me. And I think that's what the locals here are saying happens, is that you've got a sort of ghettoized lack of integration. And that is causing a problem for the people who are born and bred here in Lincolnshire. This is the area that the locals affectionately know as Foreign Island, because there are so many migrants who sort of hang out here in the day. Dimitri was saying he's not working today, so this is where they come. They get free Wi-Fi via one of the local businesses here. But of course, you've got this beautiful, stunning architecture of St Botolph's Church behind me. And it's an area that's in a great state of flux. There's a huge amount of change. Nobody here is surprised by these immigration figures today. That's what is clear. The locals here, when we've talked to them about the latest immigration figures, they've just laughed and said, at least 600,000. They find that number to probably be a little bit conservative. But anyway, I will continue to talk to people. Patrick Christys is also in the town. He's going to be continuing the broadcast from here as well for the remainder of the day from 3 till 6. But for now, Andrew, back to you.
All right, that's Bev Turner in Boston. In the studio with me, Sam Lister and Cameron. I want to say to you, while the headlines were on, I was muttering and mumbling like Victor Meldrew.
You were.
Those wretched stop oil people hurling powder all over a beautiful plant display at the Chelsea Flower Show, which celebrates nature. They're deranged, these people.
Do you know, they're not just deranged. This was just a blatant headline grab. You know, they can't think what to do now because they've been embarrassed recently on the streets where, you know, people have just chucked them off the streets and dragged them out of the way. This was a blatant attempted headline grab, and they chose the Chelsea Flower Show because no one's going to have a go at them there. They know that. All the genteel people.
Because somebody took a hosepipe to them.
Well, I hope
Should be more of that.
Do you know why isn't that? Why? You know, we were just talking earlier, weren't we, about how in other countries they drag them off the streets if
Germany and France.
Yeah, and if they're causing disruption, if they're breaking the law, they drag them off the streets. Why aren't we doing that?
Do you remember when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, Sam? He bought a big hosepipe to turn on protesters. You remember? And who stopped him doing it?
Theresa May.
Who was, we now know, probably the worst Home Secretary in the history of the country, because she was the one who axed 20,000 police jobs too.
Well, exactly.
But these protests, what I find so upsetting is it's all ordinary people. You know?
Yes.
People will have saved up these tickets.
I know.
And they're going to have a lovely day out. It's a lovely, beautiful day. They go and look at a lovely garden.
And also, think about the people who created that display. Probably their life's work.
Well, I mean, you know, if they can do it to works of art in galleries, they can do it to plants. And, and these people are supposed to be saving the planet. They actually don't know what they're doing. It kind of brings us to a story today, which is in the Mail, where Gary Lineker has now moved his affiliations from. He's now supporting climate change fanatics.
Is he now?
And he's actually saying that the Just Stop Oil eco-zealots, they're heroes. You know, this guy is appalling. He's just come back from Italy, where he went to get an award from Amnesty.
Presumably he flew.
Of course he did. And probably first class, knowing him. And he went to collect an award from Amnesty International for his work supporting migrants. He hasn't done any work supporting migrants. What he's done is posted a few tweets. And let's look at what those tweets were. There was a tweet comparing this government's attempt to stop illegal immigration to what was happening in Nazi Germany in the 30s. That's what he compared this country to. And he got an award for that. And now he's decided he's going to start back in the eco-zealots. This is obviously his latest campaign, his latest cause.
And more for the BBC, Sam, for allowing him back behind the microphone. When we all know, I don't watch football, don't know anything about it, don't know if anybody does.
No, we don't.
I know your hubby does. But we know that they lost. The audience went up when he wasn't there. That's right.
Yes.
But the BBC, he walked over the BBC.
Well, I think I'll just read you this quote from Craig McKinley, he's a Conservative MP for South Thanet. It's another self-congratulatory fest of one woke group to another woke activist. I mean, this is what sums it up, isn't it? This is a kind of self-perpetuating, congratulatory group who just pat each other on the back for being woke, being, politically correct on these things. But what are they actually doing? You know, what is Gary Lineker doing? As Carol says,
I'll tell you what he's doing. He's collecting 1.35 million a year from the licence fee money from us. He needs to decide whether he wants to be a public broadcaster or an activist, because he can't be both.
But again, he's unsackable now.
So. He is unsackable, and he makes a fool of them, and he's doing it yet again. You know, he still believes that the rules of public broadcasting don't apply.
Well,
to
he's
him.
right, they don't.
Well, no, he is right.
Because he seems to get away with it.
Yeah, because we just let him do it.
But all the time, it's ordinary people. So it's the viewers who pay the licence fee, are forced to pay the licence fee, and they have no choice over having Gary Lineker on their screens.
If he had any guts about it,
who go to these events. I've never forgiven them for disrupting the World Snooker, Carol. You know, the Just Stop Oil protesters.
To be honest, I'm not with you there, Sam. I mean, I would kind of quite like that.
But it's ordinary people going out, saving up, going to an event that they've looked forward to for months, and then these people ruin it, and then he's on their side, and we have to pay for it.
If he had the courage of his convictions, he would pack in his job with the BBC, because he's as rich as God now, and he should actually devote his life to activism. We'd all have more respect for him if he did that, if he joined the protest, if he became a protester, but he doesn't want to do that.
Now, let's talk about Boris Johnson. We know yesterday it was a huge story on all the front pages that the Cabinet Office most senior civil servant had passed a dossier of about 12 allegations, which is in a Downing Street diary, that Boris Johnson may have breached lockdown rules and regulations. I've written about it extensively in the Mail today, and they also referred this information to the Privileges Committee, which is what was quite close to concluding its investigation into whether Boris misled Parliament.
Yes.
Does it stagger you, Sam, who's been working in Westminster for a long time, that not only did they not have the courtesy, the Cabinet Office, Civil Service and the Minister involved, of telling Boris, he's a serving MP and a former Prime Minister, but if they'd spoken to his office in the first place, they may have discovered these so-called breaches of the code, absolutely nothing of the sort.
This is the thing. I think people will be surprised that civil servants off their own back can report a former Prime Minister to the police.
Two police forces.
Without any kind of reference to anybody else. Now, if you speak to the officials, they say this is completely in line with the code of conduct that civil service have to abide by. If they find any evidence of suggested wrongdoing, then they are under an obligation to report it, and that's what they're saying. But I read your piece with great interest, Andrew, and I know you say in it that friends of Boris say he was absolutely furious when he found this out, and that reflects actually the conversations I was having yesterday, where allies of his told me that he's just had enough now. He's had enough, and that he's going to start fighting back. Now, what form that takes, I don't know. It's a bit early to say, but certainly there was absolute fury about how he's been treated in this.
Number 10 in the Cabinet Office is saying, Malone, that they confirm what I wrote in the paper today, that a junior minister nobody's ever heard of, what's his name? Jeremy Quinn. Authorised writing to the Privileges Committee saying, we think he might have broken the law on 12 more occasions, investigate it, but they insist no minister was involved in the decision to talk to the police. I don't believe it.
I don't buy it, not for a second. And you know what Sam was just saying there, Boris is now fed up, he's going to fight back. I really hope he does. He said yesterday he was thinking of suing. I really hope he does, and the people who have done this are named in shame, because this, it's interesting. Do you know who's in the Cabinet Office? I'm sure you do.
I do.
Yeah, and so we know that Rachel Reeves' husband is in the Cabinet Office.
That's the Shadow Chancellor.
That's the Shadow Chancellor.
He's a civil servant.
Who was no fan of Boris. We know that a very prominent journalist who works for The Guardian, her husband also works in the Cabinet Office. So there's a lot of left-wing people in the Cabinet, left-wing supportive people in the Cabinet Office who clearly hate Boris. And it's interesting that the civil service are going after Remainer ministers.
They got Dominic Raab.
They got Dominic Raab. They're trying, and they won't give up on Suella. They will keep on with Suella.
They targeted Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, Brexiteer.
And they've come back for Boris a second time. So we have to stop this. These are people who are supposed to be looking after the best interests of this country in the Cabinet Office, and they're clearly not doing that. We're in a cost of living crisis, and this is what they're concentrating on. How scared are these pygmies of Boris coming back? How scared?
The Cabinet Office, which does lots of things behind the scenes that nobody really knows what they do. The Cabinet Office Minister, who is the Deputy Prime Minister, it happens to be Oliver Dowden, a Remainer.
How funny.
Closest friend politically, Rishi Sunak. And Boris's people think ministers were trying to get Boris. If the Privileges Committee doesn't finish him off, let's see if we can finish him off.
Well, I spoke to a lot of people yesterday, and you can imagine, and I spoke to people who were close to Oliver Dowden, and they absolutely are adamant that they had nothing to do with it. That it was nothing to do with them. It's all to do with the civil servants.
Funny that.
But actually, I think the civil service side of it is a big thing, because Conservatives are furious about
they now appear to be running the country.
I
thought civil servants took orders from the elected politicians. The civil service blob got Raab, tried to get Braverman, tried to get Boris again.
Do you remember when they tried to... they wouldn't implement Braverman's Rwanda policy because they said it was offensive to their beliefs. We have to accept now the government...
It was Priti Patel's act. She actually imposed a ministerial order compelling them to do their job. Why did she have to do that?
It's clear now the government is at war with the civil service. And it's interesting, I'm old enough to remember, and you certainly are, a time when the civil service hated Labour. Now they hate the Tories.
Because they've been in power for 14 years, and they did Brexit.
There are conversations, there are conversations I've been having this week with senior figures in the Conservatives who say it is now time to go for the American-style civil service, because they cannot get things done. They want people in there who are on their side. Exactly. So you bring in your own people to kind of force things through in departments, because they just feel so frustrated. That
but why have we let it go on for this long? Why has Rishi let it go on for so long? I don't get it.
Because he's weak.
He is weak.
And he's a technocrat, and he's not. His chest isn't heaving with passionate Tory ideas.
And Sue Gray was also in the Cabinet Office as well.
Of course she was. We've come to the end of the show, but just to say, one very prominent Conservative peer sent me a message this morning saying, read your piece, Pierce, well, and he said, the civil service has physically and intellectually disconnected from this government. Staggering, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's Carol Malone, that's Sam Lister. Bev Turner was in Boston, and we've got much more to come from Boston, so stay tuned to GB News. We're going to continue our coverage in Boston throughout the day. We're going to get a final word from Bev in Boston, and I'll see you next week.
That's right. Thank you. Patrick Christie's will also be carrying on here this afternoon. We're looking into these figures, these migration figures. They are absolutely fascinating. 606,000 net migration. The government planned for 230,000. That's the problem. We don't have enough resources. We don't have enough hospitals. We don't have enough schools. We will be talking about this for the remainder of the day on GB News. I have had a wonderful morning here in Boston, meeting the local people. It's a very resilient community here. But the weather is coming up next.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. For most, it's another fine day today. Feeling warm in the sunny spells with light winds, all thanks to this big area of high pressure, which will continue to control our weather for the next several days. Weather fronts toppling around the top will bring some cloud and patchy rain to northern Scotland, mostly on Saturday, but as I say, for most places, dry and fine. We'll see some cloud here and there today. Won't be blue skies everywhere. The cloud bubbling up, just a very small chance of a shower over the hills of northern England. But most places, as I say, seeing decent spells of sunshine. Still a bit of a breeze across the northern Isles of Scotland. Temperatures here 10, 11, maybe 12 Celsius, but for most we're in the high teens, low 20s. About average for the time of year, but feeling pleasant in that sunshine. Through this evening, not a great deal of change. The cloud will tend to break up a little more, so clear spells for most. Might just turn a little misty over the Midlands, maybe parts of Wales, and the cloud will start to increase over western Scotland as that weather front approaches. Temperature-wise, well, where it stays cloudy, probably staying in double figures, but for most turning quite cool down to single figures, and actually not too far off freezing through some of the sheltered glens across Scotland. There will be thickening cloud over the western Isles of Scotland during Friday, with a little bit of light rain and drizzle possible extending into the Highlands, but the Central Belt, Northern Ireland, England and Wales, again, most places fine, bright, plenty of sunny spells, light winds and feeling pleasant with those temperatures getting into the high teens across the north, low 20s further south. And not a great deal of change as we head through Friday evening and indeed into the weekend. That high pressure is set to dominate. Don't forget, UV levels are high. The sun is strong at this time of year, so you will need the sunscreen throughout this weekend. Sunny spells continuing even into Monday, but it is actually going to turn a little cooler as we go through this bank holiday weekend.
Hello, you're right. Good, thank you.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Good afternoon, you're with GB News Live. I'm Tom Harwood and here's what's coming up. New figures have shown that UK net migration reached 606,000 last year, a record for a 12-month period, although slightly less than had been predicted. What's going on? Well, we'll be getting all the reaction live from across the country. And Ofgem has dropped its energy price cap by £450. But campaigners have warned the move is unlikely to provide that much relief to struggling households. We'll be breaking down what the figures mean for you. And you must be joking. Presidential hopeful Ron DeSantis was announcing his White House bid in what was described as a disastrous Twitter event live yesterday, after the social media site was overwhelmed by the number of viewers who tuned in. What could this mean for his presidential hopes? We'll also be paying tribute to the Queen of Rock and Roll, Tina Turner, who passed away yesterday aged 83. She simply was the best. But first, here are your headlines with Rhiannon Jones.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. Net migration to the UK reached a record level of 606,000 people last year. ONS data shows around 1.2 million long-term migrants entered the country in 2022, with 557,000 leaving. That's despite repeated Tory pledges to bring overall numbers down. Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick says the government's trying to tackle the issue.
Well, net migration is far too high. This is placing intolerable pressure on public services, on housing supply, and our ability to integrate people into our country. The Conservative Party has made a promise to reduce net migration, and we're absolutely determined to do that. Well, we've made a very significant intervention this week, which will make a tangible difference, reducing the number of student dependents that come to our universities, because universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business.
But Shadow Immigration Minister Stephen Kinnock says government policy is to blame for the rise in numbers.
Numbers are too high. They need to come down. The reason they've lost control is because they've failed to do enough to invest in skills and talent and career development here in the UK. So employers are being forced to reach for overseas migrant labour because they don't have the pipeline of people that are ready to come and work and attracted as well to the opportunities that are here in the UK.
Rishi Sunak has welcomed the reduction in the energy price cap, describing it as a major milestone in his goal of halving inflation. Ofgem's announced the typical annual household energy bill will fall to a maximum of £2,074 a year from July. That's a drop of £426. Ofgem says the first price drop in 18 months reflects recent falls in wholesale energy prices. Security guards at Heathrow Airport are beginning a 3-day strike over pay on what's expected to be one of the busiest days of the year for air travel. Heathrow says it may take longer than usual to get through security, but claims it has contingency plans in place to minimise disruption. Members of the Unite Union have already held 15 days of industrial action, including over the Easter holidays. 3 Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage at London's Chelsea Flower Show.
Oh, for God's sake!
No! Stop it!
Members of the public expressed their